The country had no name that any living tongue still spoke. He had walked into it 3 days before, past the last stone cairn marking the edge of anything men had ever bothered to map, and the cairn had been so old that the marks upon it were not readable in any alphabet he had learned in his long life, and he had learned many. The wind had taken the rest of the markings. The wind here did that kind of work. It went at stone with a patience no man or God had ever been able to match. And what the wind had not taken, the cold had. It was cold in a register he had no word for. He had crossed colder countries. He had stood on glaciers and slept on frost plains, and walked naked out of deaths that would have frozen another man into the earth where he fell. He knew cold. This was not the cold he knew. The cold here did not move. The cold here was a condition of the air that did not admit of disturbance. No warmth broke it. No breath parted it. No body moving through it was ever truly in it. A man in this country was an object that the cold had decided to permit. He felt that as he walked. He had never felt it in the cold before, and he filed the feeling as he had been filing everything since the furnace, and he kept walking. The pull was strong here. It had been strong for a long time now. Since the cold country, since the ridge where he had spoken the name he was not supposed to know, it had been pulling north and pulling hard. And every day the pulling had been stronger and the resistance beneath it sharper. He had read the pull wrong for a long time. He had read it for 10,000 years as the ordering's hand routing him where the ordering wanted him routed. That had been accurate for 10,000 years. It was not accurate now. Now the pull was different. Now the pull was the hand of his maker trying to turn him back from a country the maker did not want him walking into. And the further he walked, the harder the hand pulled. And the harder the hand pulled, the more certain he became that whatever stood at the end of the pulling was a thing the maker had spent a great deal of work keeping him from. He walked into the hand. He had decided, somewhere in the cold country, that every league he walked from that day onward he would walk as an auditor of the country he had been born into. And an auditor does not turn back when the country makes clear it would prefer him absent. He saw the mountain on the 4th day. It stood alone on the white plain like a thing the ice had agreed after long argument to permit. Black basalt, conical, the snow clinging to its upper slopes and the wind stripping its flanks where the angle was steep enough to refuse holding. There was no range around it. There was no foothill. There was no chain of ridges leading up to it that would suggest the geology that had raised it. It was simply a mountain, and it was alone. And the plain around it lay flat in every direction for a distance his eye could not resolve in the white light. He stopped at the edge of his first sighting and looked at it for a long time. He knew the shape weather made. He knew the shape geology made. He knew what a mountain looked like when the ground had finished arguing with itself and the stone had found its angle of repose. He knew further what a mountain looked like when ice had worked on it for an age, or for 2, or for 10. This mountain did not have any of those shapes. The cone was too correct. The symmetry was, when he walked a quarter league west and looked again, still symmetrical, which no mountain had ever been to his eye when approached from a second bearing. The basalt met the ice in a line, and the line was repeated at intervals around the circumference. A line at a man's height, a line at a giant's, a line higher than that, faint and weathered but measurable if the eye was patient. A man not looking would see a mountain. He was looking. Someone had built this and then let time weather it to pass for what men expected. The weathering was the work of ages. The building was older. He could not tell of this distance by how much. He walked to it. The cavern entrance was not cave-shaped. Caves, when the ground opens them, open raggedly. A cave is a wound. This was a cut. The top of it was a single span of stone laid horizontally across 2 uprights, and the span had been straight when it was set, and the wind had taken only enough from it in the intervening ages to round the hard edges. He measured the lintel with his eye. He catalogued the angle. He stood beneath it for the small space of a breath, and then he walked beneath it, and the wind fell behind him. The corridor went down, not steeply. The grade was comfortable to walk, which was a measurement he filed because nothing in nature graded a passage for the comfort of the walker. The walls were smoothed without being polished. The smoothing was the work of time. The cutting was the work of something that had worked in straight lines before time had gotten to it. He walked. His footfalls returned to him off the stone in a register that told him the stone was solid and thick, and that the corridor had been cut through it rather than cast into it. The air changed as he descended. It lost the frozen sting of the waste above him. It acquired a different cold, older cold, contained cold. The cold of a space that had been sealed for so long that what cold remained in it was the cold it had been sealed with. Not the surface's weather, its own. The corridor turned once at a right angle. He walked through the turn without slowing. The chamber opened before he was ready for it to open. One step he was in the corridor. The next the walls had withdrawn from him. Not sharply, not with any sound he could name, but withdrawn. And the ceiling had lifted out of his peripheral vision into somewhere he could not see from where he stood. And he was at the threshold of a space whose scale his eye did not, at the first moment, resolve. He stood still. He had learned in the long years that some spaces had to be let to arrive in their own time. The chamber arrived in pieces. The floor first, flat, honed, reflective in the low light with the wet black sheen of a surface that had not been walked on often enough to dull. The ceiling somewhere far above him, lost in a dark that carried the faint sense of vault rather than roof. Then the walls, falling away to left and right in straight runs whose ends his eye did not find. And then, at last, the far wall. He walked toward it. It was not stone. It was not any stone he had seen in any country, in any age. He walked closer, and the wall did not resolve into any familiar material the closer he came. It was metal, or it was something that metal was the wrong word for. It had the density of metal. The surface was not a smith's surface. It shifted color as he moved along the floor. Not reflected color, not the mirror tricks he had seen in the deep vaults of Karl, but its own color, rising out of the wall itself as though the wall were choosing it. A blue that was the blue of a raven's throat. A green that was the green of a dragonfly's wing. A violet that was very nearly past violet. A gold that lay, he thought, somewhere beyond gold. And beneath all of them, riding them the way a low tone rides beneath a song, the impression of a color that was not a color at all, but the sense of a color in a spectrum his eye was not built to receive. The wall held more light than light was meant to have. He stopped before it. He laid his palm, the left palm, the one that had carried residue back out of the furnace, against the surface, and the surface was cold in a way that did not belong to the cavern. It did not pull warmth from him. It did not give warmth. It simply was, at a temperature that was neither of those things. And his hand came away as his hand had gone. He reached out of 10,000 years of reflex with the part of himself that reached. He had reached that way into every wall he had ever laid his hand against. He had reached into the walls of Selinari in the dream year, and they had answered. He had reached into the wall of the mother's corridor, and it had answered. And the answering had been a small, foul thing, but it had been an answering. He reached into this wall as he had reached into every wall before it, and the wall took what he reached with and did not return it. Not blocked, received, as a dry sponge receives water. The pressure of his attention went into the chromatic surface and did not come back. And there was no resistance, and there was no answer, and there was no bargain offered. And there was, after the pressure had gone in, simply less of him than there had been a moment before. And the wall had that much of him now, and it would keep it. He took his hand away and stepped back. He had never felt that before. He saw the frame. It was set into the wall, dead center, at a height he had to tilt his head to take in fully. Larger than a doorway, rectangular. The chromatic shimmer of the wall did not cross into the frame's surface. Inside the frame, the wall gave way to a held stillness, like the stillness of water that something is holding in a shape water does not choose to hold. He walked toward it. The stillness did not reflect him. It held, instead, a figure. The figure was inside the frame, the way a thing in amber is inside the amber. He stopped at a distance from which he could take it in. The chamber's proportions had begun, slowly, to give him their measure, and the measure of the figure came with them. It was 2 of his own height. It was, when he let his eye walk it fully, perhaps more than 2. It stood suspended in the frame's held surface, not floating. There was no sense of weightlessness in it. Held at a scale the chamber had quietly built up around him while he was not yet looking at it. It was humanoid in silhouette. It was not humanoid in any other way. The stance was forward canted. The forelimbs were long enough to reach the floor without the body stooping to follow them. The musculature ran wet pale along the limbs. No hide, no plating. The fiber laid bare as though the body had been built without the covering other bodies had been given, or had shed it and not missed it. The ribs along the torso were broad and close set and fused down into the hip girdle in an architecture his eye did not at first understand as a skeleton, because the skeleton was on the outside of the body in a sense he had no word for. The feet were clawed and splayed. The hands, if the forward limbs ended in hands, ended in something that was the same bone as the feet, with the same splay and the same purpose. The head was small. That was what he came back to after he had taken in the rest. The head was small for the body and set on a long neck, and the mouth was not a mouth in the way of any mouth he had ever faced. Horizontal, narrow, ringed in fine teeth, with fine, wet filaments trailing from the lower edge down toward the breast. And set into the breast, between the ribs, dark, a green aperture, dormant, an organ without light. He did not know what it was. He did not have in any register of his long knowledge a filing for it. He stood before the frame at the measured distance a fighter stands at before a weapon he has not yet named, and he read the figure, and his reading returned to him nothing. Not because the figure resisted his reading, it did not. Because the figure, like the wall, had no surface his reading operated on. He reached toward it with the part of himself that reached, and what he reached into was the same absence he had reached into with the wall. The wall had taken what he reached with. The figure was of the wall. He stepped closer, not because approach was wise, because he had come a long way and he was here, and he had not crossed the knoll to stand at a careful distance from what the knoll had been built to hide. He stepped closer, and the rune blade was already in his hand, though he did not remember drawing it. And he opened the spirit vision, and the spirit vision read what the ordinary reach had not been built to read. Not the wall, the figure, laid out in the spirit vision, in the way a smith's work lies open to a smith's eye, when the smith is looking for what another smith has done to it. The figure had been made. That was the first reading. The figure had been made, and then the making had been gone over a second time. And the second going over had been a refinement. And the refinement had been aimed at one thing. It had been aimed at him, at the part of him that reached, at the registers his sorcery operated in. The making had been laid down with those registers in mind, and the refinement on top of the making had closed every seam the reaching might have entered through. And the seam closing was new work, newer than the figure beneath it, newer than the wall holding it, newer, he thought, than the last age that had laid hands on the world. He stood in the spirit vision, and he read the work as a man reads the work of another man's hand. And what the work told him was simple, and the simplicity of it was the cold thing. The first one had been easier than this would be. The second had been harder than the first. He had read both times what he had read. He had read correctly. The master had read his readings back, and the master had revised. The thing in the frame was the third revision. The seams the second one had still carried, the registers his blade had still found purchase in, the small openings in the work where his sorcery had still bitten. Those seams were not in this one. Those seams had been audited and closed. The master had been watching the fights. The master had been taking notes. The master had been iterating. His instruments in the ordinary registers were silent before this thing, because the thing had been built deliberately and with care to render his instruments silent before it. He understood, with the cold, small precision of a man taking a measurement he had hoped not to have to take, that he was going to have to fight this thing with steel. Only steel. He had not fought only with steel in an age, and the figure's head lifted. There was no sound, no hiss of atmosphere, no grinding of mechanism, no report of stone on stone. The held surface of the frame simply ceased to hold, rippled once as water ripples when a finger is laid upon its center, and the figure stepped forward one step, out of the stillness and onto the floor of the chamber. The floor did not ring. The stone beneath his boots sent up a tremor that was not sound and was not silence. And his boots felt the tremor through the leather and up the bone. And the tremor told him, plainly and without drama, what the weight of the thing was. The chest eye kindled. It came on slowly, the way a banked ember comes on when the air is let to it. Dark green first, then brighter, then a light that was not a flame's light and not a torch's light, and not the light of anything he had lit or been lit by. It was the light of a thing being switched on. It rose through the dark of the breast cavity and stood open. The antennae above the small head twitched once, fine, quick, like insects finding a scent. And they found him. Not the hand, him, the whole standing length of him, read in a register his sorcery did not run in and could not interfere with. The mouth stalk lowered. The creature took its second step. He had stood before gods. He had stood before hell, and the sovereign darkness had asked his permission. And he had known, in the asking, what it was. He had stood before the mother of lies in her corridor, and she had shown him the vista of still water and offered him permanence. And he had known the cage in the offer before the offer had finished being made. He had stood before everything his long life had set him before, and at every standing his instruments had spoken. Some he had refused, some he had answered, some he had struck down. But in every standing there had been a reading, and the reading had told him what the thing was, and from the reading he had known what to do. He stood now before the figure, and what the spirit vision had given him was the shape of the absence, the work the master had done to make sure no further reading would come. He knew that the thing had been built to be unreadable. Knowing that did not give him a reading. Knowing that gave him only the certainty that there would not be one. He did not know what it could do. He did not know whether his blade would cut the pale musculature or wring off it as the ribs had wrung the first cut of whatever fight was about to follow. He did not know whether the chamber he had walked into was a tomb or a trap, or the antechamber to the thing he had come for, or all three at once. He did not know. For the first time in 10,000 years, Immortal Kane did not know. The creature took its fourth step. Kane raised the blade.
Waarom naast die? Swing with me. Tell us die to me. Never die, Dwarneverti. Dormi.
The portal closed behind him with a sound that was not a sound, and Kane was on the ground. He had not chosen to be on the ground. The dislocation had taken him at the knees, the way a beast taken at the knees goes down. And what hit the earth hit it with the dead, settled weight of stone, arriving at its angle of repose. His boots cut twin furrows. The grit was not ice, it was sand, hot to the bone of his hand, the way sand is hot only in the desert countries. And the heat of it filed itself in him before he had decided what country he had been delivered to. He lay still for the space of a breath. The air was scorched. It did not move. It was the dry, settled heat of a country whose weather had finished arguing with itself an age ago, and lay now under a sun that did not negotiate. He felt the grain of the desert against his left palm, the palm that had carried residue back out of the furnace. And the residue and the sand met one another along the lines of his hand, and neither acknowledged the other. He rose. He knew the country, the Lomarne, high plateau between the ruins of Sebe to the south and the ice sea to the north. He had crossed it in 3 centuries he could number, and others he could not. And his memory had filed it as a waste of drifting dunes and aimless wind. The wind was not aimless today. There was no wind today. The dunes did not drift. The country lay under a stillness that was the cousin of the stillness in the Norl, and was not the same stillness. He began to walk.
Warum nasty? Suena with me. Get to the style. Tunepu. Ne postai. Duorne verti. Yeah.